Hey, I bet you didn't expect to see the Ranch Fairy here because this isn't the Ranch Fairy channel. This is what they call collaboration. Nate Sellers is much better at this than I am to, show you in a linear fashion a certain topic. I'm a little bit sloppier and paint with a much broader brush. Here's the topic. These arrows are all the same spine, but they're different lengths. So they're not the same spine. Dude, I'm serious. They're not the same spine. Here goes. Nate knows what he's talking about. Boom. Late.
Hello everyone, thanks for coming outside me today. Today we're talking everything spine, static spine, dynamic spine, what happens to your arrow when you add point weight or add weight on the other end with wraps and lighted nocks, and more importantly, what happens to your arrow when you cut it shorter or longer than the 28-inch industry standard. So real quick, let's actually talk about what the spine number is and what the spine number actually means. There's two types of spine, static spine and dynamic spine, and every manufacturer is going to give you the static spine number. To find the static spine of any arrow shaft, you take a 29-inch shaft of any arrow type, put it on a span of 28 inches, so 28 inches from peg to peg, and then you hang a roughly 2-pound weight right off the center. And however much that arrow bends or bows or deflects down the center, that is the static spine for that arrow. So you'll get a static spine of 300 or 350, 400, and so on. Lots of different factors go into deciding what the static spine is. That can be the thickness of the wall of the carbon or the aluminum, the overall diameter of the arrow, and of course, what the arrow is actually made out of, carbon, aluminum, or a carbon aluminum composite. So static spine is going to get you in the ballpark. It's going to get you in the area based on your draw length and the poundage and speed of your bow, what static spine you should be shooting. We don't want to be shooting a static spine that's too soft or too stiff. It's going to cause some tuning errors, and particularly towards the too soft or too weak side, you could actually damage your bow if you go too far. But what no spine chart can tell you is the dynamic spine of the arrow, and this is really what we're going to focus on today. Dynamic spine is built all on you, your specifications of your draw length, your bow's poundage, what length of arrow you're going to be shooting, and how much point weight or weight on the back end that arrow actually has. So here we have two arrows, the top one being a gold tip 300 spine and the bottom one being a 2514 Easton aluminum. Now that 2514 is roughly a 310 spine, and of course that top gold tip is a 300 spine. But again, that is measured at static and it's measured at 28 inches. But with me being 6'4" and having a 31-inch draw length, my arrows are 31 to 31.5 inches long, which means they are actually weaker. They're not as stiff as that 28-inch industry standard. And the opposite is true if you shoot shorter than a 28-inch arrow. You start cutting down to 27, 26, it's actually stiffer than the rated number that's on the shaft. Also, as a little side note here, the overall diameter has a huge part to play with dynamic spine. And anybody that shoots in the indoor archery side of things, that shoots a large diameter carbon or aluminum arrow, like a 23, 25, or 27, they will tell you dynamically, they just react differently because they're so large in their diameter. Now, for those of you that shoot hunting arrows, you don't have as much to worry about there, but a large aluminum arrow like this 2514 comes off very stiff dynamically. So sure, a 310 actually sounds weaker than this 300, but in reality, with the dynamic spine, it actually comes off the bow stiffer in the tuning process. So now dynamic spine is something I really have to think about when I'm shooting, and particularly since I have an arrow and draw length that's so much longer, 3 inches, than the industry standard. I really have to watch how much weight I put in the front end and how much weight I add to the back. Let's talk about the front end first though. Now, I don't actually own an arrow spine tester where I can measure this out at the 31-inch spine. Those things are quite expensive. They're almost as much as a bow press, and it just doesn't make sense for the average archer, the average hunter, to own one. So I have to kind of ballpark it and guesstimate what my actual dynamic spine is going to end up being. This arrow here, like I said, is 31 inches long, and I've added 100 grains of brass and a 125 grain point. So not only am I losing dynamic stiffness by being longer than the 28-inch industry standard, I'm now really loading up the front. The more weight you add to the front of any arrow, the softer the spine is going to be. The more weight you add to the back with lighted nocks and wraps and longer, heavier fletchings, the stiffer the spine is going to be. Now, this obviously especially with 225 grains up front, is going to severely outweigh any stiffness I might add to the back end. So I really have to be more aware of what I'm doing to the front. Now I am really pushing the limits of this arrow. If I had to estimate, it's probably close to like a 320 spine statically from this 31-inch arrow, but then I throw on 225 up front. I'm probably doing like a 375 to almost a 400 spine arrow when it's dynamically shot out of the bow because of all the weight I have at the front. Now, of course, if I wanted to stiffen this arrow up a little bit more easily, I could cut off some of the carbon, but you can only go so far depending on your draw length. I like to keep the front end of my arrow past the shelf of the bow so that when I screw a fixed blade broadhead onto here, I don't have to worry about it contacting my hand when I'm at full draw or shooting the bow. So for those of you with short draw lengths or looking to build a super heavy high FOC arrow, you really have to be aware of your dynamic spine in conjunction with your static spine. Sure, that static spine chart is going to get you very, very close. Trust me, I promise, for the vast majority of us archers. But if you're shooting an arrow that is shorter or longer than that AMO 28-inch industry standard, you're either stiffening or softening the spine. And then when you start throwing in big heavy inserts and big heavy broadheads, you're softening it even more. And that's something you have to be aware of, because when you go to tune these arrows, either bare shaft tuning or paper tuning with the fletchings on, you might see some weird tuning issues because you're not taking into account the dynamic spine. So here we have a really quickly thrown together illustration of this point. I have this arrow, 29-inch gold tip, spanned at 28 inches right now. So this is the industry standard for the situation. I have a weight hung off the center of the arrow, and I have this measuring tape here just so we get an idea of how much flex we are getting in this arrow based upon different spans of 28, and we're going to go down to 26 inches. So right now this approximately sits at the bottom of the arrow, approximately sits at 18 inches when I let go of the pressure by lifting up the weight, and then when I add the weight it drops to about 18 3/8. So we get about 3/8 of an inch deflection. Of course, this is not a finite example, we're just showing this for illustration purposes. So we moved the scissors stand closer together, which raises everything, but we're not worried about that. We're just worried about the deflection here, not the actual height of everything. Right now I have the weight on here and I have it set so the bottom of the arrow is just touching the 17-inch mark. If I alleviate the weight, it only moves the arrow up to about 16 3/4. 16 3/4. So we've only moved 1/4 of an inch instead of 3/8 of an inch. So we've actually moved an 1/8 inch less by now at this 25-inch span. Now you might think, okay, an 1/8 over 3 inches versus that 28 versus that 25-inch span, is that really all that big of a difference? In the arrow world, an 1/8 of an inch could mean a mile. It is a huge change. Anybody who's been tuning for a long time knows that the slightest change with an arrow can drastically change its point of impact, its tuning, so on and so forth. So again, 17 inches right now to the bottom with the weight. If we leave it up, it's 16 3/4. So we only move 1/4 of an inch or 2/8 instead of the 3/8 where it's fully spanned out at 28 inches. So that's all for this video on everything that covers spine. But if I didn't cover everything you thought you needed, or if you have any other questions regarding arrow tuning and spine tuning and all that sort of stuff, follow the links in the description below. Hit me up on Facebook and Instagram. My email's even down there if you want that more personal touch. And of course, you can always leave a comment here on YouTube. Hope you're able to get outside, enjoy the sport of archery hunting if you so choose. Definitely enjoy God's beautiful creation, and we'll get to see you next time.